A garden of love. My name is Maria. I am now an old woman, but I remember my childhood very clearly. It was not an easy time for me. When I was a little girl, my parents did not get along. They fought all the time. Every day there was loud shouting in our small house. I was just a child, and I wanted to be happy and play, but the fighting made me very sad. I often sat alone in my room. I tried to close my door and not listen to the noise. My heart felt heavy, and sometimes I wanted to cry. I didn't know what to do. I was just a little girl, and I felt small and helpless. At school, I tried to smile. My teacher was kind, and my friends were nice, but inside, I felt very lonely. I wished my home could be like other homes, full of love and peace. It was hard to pretend everything was okay when I was so sad inside. I started writing in a small notebook. This was my secret friend. I wrote about my feelings, my dreams, and my fears. Writing helped me feel a little better. I didn't show my notebook to anyone. It was the only way I could express what was in my heart. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of shouting. It was difficult to start the day in a house full of anger. I tried to stay away from my parents. I would play outside with my friends, but the noise from home always followed me. Even when I was playing, I couldn't forget what was happening at home. At night, I would lie in my bed and listen to my parents fighting. I would close my eyes very tight, hoping the noise would stop, but it never did. Sometimes I would hear my mother crying. This broke my heart. I wanted to help her, but I was just a little girl. One night, after a big fight, my father left the house. He didn't come back for a long time. I didn't know where he went. I felt scared and alone. My mother became very quiet. She seemed sad and tired all the time. My teacher at school noticed that I wasn't smiling much anymore. One day she asked me, "Is everything okay at home?" I didn't know how to answer her. I wanted to tell her everything, but I was too scared. I just nodded and said, "I'm fine." I thought the fighting was my fault. I tried to be a good girl, hoping my parents would stop fighting, but nothing changed. I wanted to be happy again, but I didn't know how. I looked at other families and saw how they laughed and talked together. I wanted to feel safe and loved, but I didn't know if that would ever happen for me. As time passed, I became very quiet. I didn't talk much to anyone. I didn't feel like playing anymore. My friends noticed, but I didn't know how to explain to them. How could I tell them about the fighting at home? One day, my father came back, but he was different. He didn't smile. He didn't talk much. He didn't even look at me or my mother. I felt strange. I was happy to see him, but I was also scared. What if the fighting started again? That night, I heard my parents talking quietly. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard my mother say, I can't live like this anymore. My heart raced. I didn't want them to separate, but I also didn't want the fighting to continue. The next day, my father left again. This time, he didn't say goodbye. I sat in my room, looking out the window. I felt empty. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I didn't want anyone to know how I felt. Days turned into weeks, and my father didn't come back. My mother became even more sad. She didn't smile. She only worked at home, cleaning and cooking. I tried to help her, but I didn't know what to do. At school, I couldn't concentrate. My mind was always at home, wondering if my father would return. But there was no answer. I started to feel lost. I didn't know what to believe anymore. One morning, I woke up to a quiet house. My mother was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the table. I asked her, "Mom, where is Dad?" She looked up at me, and her eyes were full of tears. "He's gone," she whispered. "He's gone for good." I felt like the world had stopped. My heart sank. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run after him, but I didn't know where to go. The days after that were very hard. My mother was always sad. I tried to help her, but I didn't know how. At school, I tried to pretend everything was fine. I smiled at my friends, but I didn't really feel happy. Sometimes I would remember the good times. I would remember when my father would come home and smile. I would remember when my mother would laugh and talk to me. But those memories felt like they were from a different life. One day, I was walking home from school when I saw my mother sitting on the porch. She looked at me and smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Come sit with me," she said softly. I sat down beside her. We didn't talk for a long time. Then I asked her, "Mom, why did Dad leave?" She sighed and looked out at the garden. "Your father and I didn't understand each other anymore," she said. "We fought all the time, and it made everything hard." I looked at her face, hoping she would say more. "I'm sorry, my daughter," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." As I grew older, I began to understand more about life and love. I knew that my parents had their problems, and they couldn't fix them. But I also knew that I had the power to heal, to forgive, and to live a life better than the past. I learned to let go of the anger I had carried for so long. I learned to forgive my parents for their mistakes. Most importantly, I learned to forgive myself. Now, when I look back on those memories, I feel peace. My childhood was difficult, but it shaped me into who I am today. I am stronger, kinder, and more understanding because of the challenges I faced. As I sit here today, I realize that the past no longer controls me. I am free. He had a big order for a wedding, and there were too many flowers to arrange. Maria walked in and said, "You look stressed. Can I help?" Nick smiled and said, "Yes, please." Maria carefully arranged bouquets with him. One weekend, the annual town fair arrived. There were games, food stalls, and music everywhere. Nick asked Maria, "Would you like to go to the fair with me?" Maria smiled and said, "Of course." At the fair, they played games like ring toss and won small prizes. Maria laughed when Nick tried to win a teddy bear, but missed every time. "Let me try," Maria said. She tossed the ring and won on her first try. She handed Nick the teddy bear and said, "This is for you." They enjoyed cotton candy and warm pretzels. At the end of the evening, they rode the Ferris wheel. As the wheel stopped at the top, Maria looked at the town lights below and said, "This is so beautiful." Nick looked at Maria and thought, "This moment feels perfect." One evening, dark clouds gathered in the sky. A strong storm hit the town with heavy rain and strong winds. Nick was worried about Maria and her grandmother. He put on his raincoat and went to their house. When he arrived, Maria was trying to save her grandmother's plants. The wind was strong and the pots were falling over. "Maria, I'm here to help," Nick shouted. Together, they moved the plants to a safe spot inside the house. Maria's grandmother thanked Nick and said, "You're a kind young man." After the storm calmed down, Maria looked at Nick and said, "Thank you for coming. I don't know what I would have done without you." Nick smiled and said, "I'll always be here to help." After the storm, the town was quiet and peaceful. Maria and Nick sat together on her porch, watching the stars. Maria said, "Thank you again for helping us. You're always so kind." Nick looked at her and said, "I care about you, Maria. You're special to me." Maria smiled softly and said, "You're special to me, too, Nick." They sat in silence for a while, enjoying the moment. Nick thought, "I've never felt this close to anyone before." Maria thought, "Nick understands me in a way no one else does." That night, they both realized their feelings for each other were growing stronger. One afternoon, Nick said to Maria, "I want to show you something special." They walked to the edge of the town where there was an empty field. The grass was overgrown and the area looked forgotten. "This is where I dream of building a beautiful garden," Nick said. "I want people to come here to relax and enjoy the flowers." Maria looked around and smiled. "It's a wonderful idea, Nick. This field has so much potential. Let's do it together." Nick felt a spark of hope. With Maria by his side, his dream seemed possible. Nick and Maria began working on the garden the next day. They cleared the weeds, dug the soil, and planted seeds. It was hard work, but they laughed and talked while they worked. As days passed, people in the town noticed their efforts. "What are you two working on?" someone asked. Nick smiled and said, "We're creating a garden for everyone to enjoy." Soon, a few townspeople offered to help. They brought tools, seeds, and even snacks to keep Nick and Maria energized. With teamwork and dedication, the garden began to take shape. One day, Maria surprised Nick with an idea. I want to add something special to the garden, she said. She brought her paints and brushes and started working on a large mural on one of the garden walls. The painting showed flowers, birds, and a sunny sky. It was full of life and color. When Maria finished, Nick stood back and admired her work. This is incredible, Maria. You've made the garden even more beautiful. Maria blushed and said, I wanted to make it special for you and the town. Nick realized how much her creativity added to his dream. Finally, the big day arrived, the grand opening of the garden. Nick and Maria invited the whole town. They decorated the entrance with colorful flowers and ribbons. When the townspeople arrived, they were amazed. This is beautiful, someone said. Another person added, it's like a little paradise. Nick and Maria gave a small speech. Nick said, this garden was my dream, but it became a reality because of Maria and everyone's help. Thank you. Maria smiled and said, we hope this garden brings you peace and happiness. The crowd clapped and cheered. After the grand opening, the garden became the heart of the town. People came to relax, have picnics, and take photos. Children played by the flowers, and couples walked hand in hand. Nick and Maria visited the garden every day to take care of the plants. They felt proud of what they had created together. One evening, as they stood in the garden watching the sunset, Nick said, this garden is more than just flowers. It's a place where people can feel happy. Maria nodded and said, and we built it together. That makes it even more special. The garden continued to grow, just like their friendship, and something even deeper. One day, as Nick and Maria were watering the plants, a group of businessmen arrived at the garden. They were wearing suits and looked serious. One of them said, this field is perfect for our new mall. We'll pay you a lot of money to sell it. Nick shook his head. This garden isn't for sale. It's for the town. The businessman frowned. Think about it. You could make a fortune. Maria stepped forward and said firmly, this garden is more valuable than money. It's a place for everyone to enjoy. The businessmen left, but they didn't look happy. Nick and Maria knew they would have to fight to protect the garden. Nick and Maria decided to ask the townspeople for help. They went door to door, explaining the situation. This garden belongs to all of us, Nick said. We need to protect it. The townspeople agreed. They signed petitions, made banners, and held a meeting in the garden. People of all ages came together, sharing stories about what the garden meant to them. When the businessmen returned, they saw a large crowd waiting for them. One person shouted, "You can't take our garden." The businessmen realized they couldn't win. They left the field and never came back. Nick and Maria smiled at each other, feeling proud of what they had achieved with the town's support. One evening, Nick and Maria were in the garden watching the sunset. The sky was painted with orange and pink colors, and the flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Nick took a deep breath and said, "Maria, there's something I need to tell you." Maria looked at him curiously. "What is it, Nick?" Nick hesitated for a moment, then said, "I've fallen in love with you. You've brought so much joy into my life, and I can't imagine my days without you." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Nick, I feel the same way. I've loved you for a while now." They sat in the garden, holding hands, feeling happier than ever. A few weeks later, Nick planned something special. He invited Maria to the garden, saying, "I have a surprise for you." When Maria arrived, she saw the garden decorated with candles and flowers. In the middle of the garden, Nick stood nervously with something in his hand. "Maria," he said, kneeling on one knee, "you've changed my life in the most wonderful way. Will you marry me?" Maria's eyes widened, and she smiled brightly. "Yes, Nick, of course I will." They hugged, surrounded by the beauty of the garden and the love they shared. Nick and Maria decided to have their wedding in the garden. On a sunny afternoon, the entire town gathered to celebrate. Maria walked down the aisle, holding a bouquet of flowers from the garden. Nick waited for her under an arch covered in roses. When they said their vows, everyone cheered and clapped. It was a perfect day. After the wedding, Nick and Maria continued to care for the garden together. It became not only a place for flowers, but also a symbol of love, friendship, and community. As Ben the storyteller, I'll say this: Nick and Maria's love story reminds us that dreams can come true when we work together and believe in each other.